Hey everyone, welcome to the episode. So Ask Aram flips the script. One Step Beyond podcast guests and listeners submit their questions and ask Aram anything. Questions can be music, life stories, business, leadership, advice, how to make the best vegan omelet, you name it. Aram will unpack your questions and leave you with info you can apply. Before we get to it, please rate, review, and subscribe.
Hi, Aram. What advice would you have for someone that's coming to the end of a project or leaving an organization and is looking to reinvent themselves? Maybe they're looking at taking on a newer type of role or maybe diving into a new industry. It'd be great to get your thoughts and advice on how someone would manage a transition like this.
My advice would be don't waste any time because you only have about an 8-month window from your last thing until you lose the credibility that's attached to it. If you're leaving a job or you're leaving a project, as soon as you're like, okay, see you later, we're done, imagine a clock starts ticking and the clock is ticking and you've got about 8 months. Around the 9-month mark, people are like, oh, what have you been up to? It's like, well, I've kind of been like reinventing myself or figuring it out. That's like years in business. So what I'd suggest is if you know this is probably not going to work out long term, I'm going to end up leaving, or this project's got a deadline, I know it's going to end, far in advance, like 6 months out, a year out, start figuring out what your next move is. If you are thinking about getting into a new industry, a year to 6 months before your role ends or you anticipate your role ends, go out, meet people. And I would encourage people just to like drop people like an email on LinkedIn. And some people are just going to ignore you for sure, 100%. Other people are going to be like, hell yeah. I mean, I've had people do that for me and I've taken calls many times when people are saying, hey, I'm thinking getting into coaching. Can I get a little bit of advice? Sure. 100%. I would start emailing people on LinkedIn, but I'd also activate your network and your friends' network. So ask everyone you know, do you know people in whatever industries you're interested in? Start talking early and far ahead. So I'll give you an example for me is that our company is made up of people who are traditional coaches. They've gone through like the education around that to get certifications, and also people who didn't go through it at all, who wouldn't be considered normal coaches, but hit me up and were like, hey, I'm interested in this. Can you tell me about it? And over time, they've come to work at the company. If you're going only through like recruiters or like kind of industry, like let's say conferences or something like that, those are typically around people who are already part of that industry. What I would suggest for you is if you want to get into a different industry, hit people on LinkedIn, but activate your network and the network outside of your network, like your friends and family network. Start talking to people. If you want to start like a consultancy or anything like that, again, you need to start way ahead of time. If you finish a job or a project, and then you're like, I want to start a consultancy, I was going to tell you, you're already too late. That 8-month window is like a serious time frame. You lose the credibility if you're basically just trying to figure out your consultancy and you don't really start executing on it for like 6 months. You lose the momentum of that role, you lose the discipline of that workspace, but you also lose a lot of the credibility that came with working in that space. It's a way stronger look to be like, hey, I'm done this job now, and then day one, I launch all my stuff, I call all my old clients, I activate my network and say, this is what I'm doing now. To do that though, like being in a consultancy is a really interesting effort because you have to actually know what you're selling. So when I started Cadence, I had already essentially built Cadence in my last job unintentionally. Basically, the company I worked at called itself a leadership company, but it was more like a public speaking company. And I do real deal leadership work. I had already unintentionally developed my practice in there. So day one, I was like, oh, this is what I do. And I wasn't a competitor to them because it's just a different thing. I was in a very lucky space because I'd essentially been building it for years. So if you want to do a consultancy, keep your job as long as you can, build your methodology, build your material, know exactly what your market is, brand yourself, then launch day one when you're out or when that project is done. So whether you're going for something new, entering into a new market, or you're going to start a consultancy, it's all about time management. You've got about 8-month window from the last day of your project or of your job. Start early. I suggest start a year out, but 6 months is also okay. And it's all about activating networks, hitting people up on LinkedIn, and really, really preparing your material if you're going to do an individual consultancy. And Eric, you are awesome. Thank you so much for the question. And I am super psyched about what comes next for you.
We want to hear from you, our audience. To submit your questions, send us a message, drop us a DM, or comment on our social channels.